Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Spitz. I'm an associate on J Street's government affairs team in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today on the topic of settler violence. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in spring 2020, there's been an increased incidence of Israeli settlers committing violent acts against Palestinians. And in recent months, we're seeing another uptick in assaults. Violence against any civilian, Israeli or Palestinian, is morally reprehensible. Pervasive violence against Palestinian people and property in the West Bank also plays a role in the de facto annexation of the West Bank. Today, we'll discuss the factors that contribute to an increased level of settler violence. We'll explore what can be done to prevent violent acts and discuss the international community's role to play. Settler violence is an issue that members of Congress have closely followed under the previous administration. In June 2020, 54 representatives wrote to then Ambassador David Friedman, asking him to speak out against the spike in violence and work with Israeli authorities to address it. I'll now introduce our speakers before our conversation begins. We're joined by Sarit Michaeli. She's B'Tselem's International Advocacy Officer and has been an integral part of B'Tselem's staff since October 2004, serving as the organization's spokesperson for over 12 years. Before joining B'Tselem, she worked extensively in the fields of journalism, graphic design, and translation in her native Israel and overseas in London and New York. In addition, she was active in social change movements, both in Israel and internationally. As well as working with the diplomatic community and international civil society groups, she documents demonstrations in the West Bank with a focus on Israeli security forces' misuse of crowd control weapons. Sarit holds a master's degree in gender studies from Birkbeck College, University of London, and a BA in graphic design from Camberwell College of Art, the London Institute. We're also joined by Avner Gvaryahu. He was born in the Israeli city of Rehovot and raised in the religious Zionist community. During his army service, he served in the special forces of the Paratroopers Brigade, where he attained the rank of staff sergeant. A year after he was discharged, he joined Breaking the Silence as a researcher and tour guide with a focus on working with world Jewry. He later became director of public outreach. Since August of 2017, he's the organization's executive director. Avner holds a BA in social work from Tel Aviv University and an MA from the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University. We're also joined by Taleb. He's a former mayor of Turmus, a Palestinian town in the West Bank, and a current municipality member and a landowner. Finally, we're joined by Lior Amihai. He's the executive director of Yesh, an Israeli human rights organization that monitors researchers and conducts legal and public advocacy regarding human rights violations inherent in Israel's prolonged occupation, with the aim of enhancing access to justice for Palestinians in the West Bank. Yesh has gained international recognition for its research and litigation in the following areas: accountability for Israeli security personnel, law enforcement towards Israeli civilians who harm Palestinians or their property, and the takeover of Palestinian land. Before joining Yesh, Lior jointly headed Peace Now Settlement Watch project, responsible for exposing and analyzing the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Lior obtained his master's degree in human rights as a Chevening Scholar from University College London, and his bachelor's from the City University of London as a participant in the Olive Tree Scholarship Program for Palestinian and Israeli scholars. Lior grew up in Jerusalem, and today he resides in Tel Aviv with his wife and their 2 children. He's the director of Yesh as of 2017. And I'll pass it off to Lior to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, J Street. And thank you, Said, Sarit, and Avner. This is a wonderful opportunity to explore and analyze settler violence. Today, we thought that we will have an interesting format because we have roughly maybe 53 minutes until we end today. We thought that the format will be of 3 sessions each, where each panelist will receive a question, and he or she will have between 4 to 5 minutes to answer, and then we'll move to the next set of sessions. Of course, the audience is more than invited to send us questions through the chat or the Q&A, and we will try to read them and insert them within the various sessions. So without further ado, I want to begin because there's a lot of exploring to do. So I will start by brief description, perhaps, of the phenomena of settler violence. I want to suggest that it's a political tool to gain more lands and intimidation of Palestinian communities throughout the West Bank and East Jerusalem. It has various forms against farmers and agricultural lands. It happens inside towns and villages through graffiti attacks. Here you can see my son, Jonathan, is curious about this discussion and what's happening. And also we had some, so it has various forms against farmers inside various towns and cities, in forms of hate graffiti and burning of cars. And most recently also we had a spike of settler violence in against Palestinian drivers in junctions throughout Road 60 of the West Bank. And notably, there's very little law enforcement, which sends a message that this violence is tolerated. It is argued that it's even succeeding to achieve its goal. And as a supportive measure for taking Palestinian lands, and there are many others, right? So settler violence is inserted when other methods are not at play. But I will end here because I want our speakers to begin. And perhaps we will start with Said Taleb, a former mayor and also part of the municipality of Turmus Ayya, to give us a brief description or sort of get us in the picture of what it feels and what it is from a Palestinian perspective. How is settler violence what is settler violence from a Palestinian perspective? You've got 5 minutes. Oh, but somebody has to unmute you. Said, you're muted, so nobody can hear you.
Okay.
There you go. Your counting starts now. No, muted again. 1 second, Said, we can't hear you.
Okay.
There you
go. First of all, thanks for everybody and for this meeting, for people who cares about what we are in and what's the settlers and the settlements do to our self. Okay. First of all, I'm Said Hussein. I'm American citizen also, and I would like to talk about myself and my land. We had problem with the settlements and the settlers, and the last, for long period of time, last few years, it was getting more violence, more taking over lands. Like myself, I do have a big piece of land close to one of the settlements, and right now, and this time, I can't even go to it because it's surrounded with the settlement, and I'm not supposed to go there, only with the soldiers, even twice a year, 2 days a time, which is 4 days all years around, to see my land, to visit my land. It was planted with olive trees. They kill all the olive trees by spraying chemical on it and by poison the trees with the drills, with all kind of, plus cutting it also. Right now, if we want to talk about violence of the settlers, it's long story, and it's a lot of accidents. In Turmus Ayya Valley, the settlers, they kill 3 guys in the valley in their own land with no reason, okay? And also they damage cars. Like last couple of weeks ago, they put fire on 2 cars in front of the soldier eye, and even the soldiers, they don't let the people see their own cars or put it of the fire. These things happens every single week. We had problem with the settlements, with the settlers. I'm sorry, with the settlers. The settlers getting more violence, more criminal, and also what's happening right now. It's like we are afraid even to be in your house. You don't know when they're gonna block the street, when you can't even go out of your city at nighttime because they're blocking the main street. You can't go to Nablus because they're blocking it from Shiloh. You can't go to Ramallah because they're blocking it from what's the name of it? Ofra. That means we are in Curfew. They put the settlers in the West Bank, they put the people in Curfew. In Curfew, that means they are harming every single thing, people, cars, animals, trees, every single thing. And also the worst thing, they taken over the land with no question asked from the government, with no question asked from the government. When we make when we go to make a claim or something, all our claims goes to unknown person, because when we go to the Israeli police and we make a claim because of they cutting the trees or they burn some cars, second, right away they put to unknown person. And also the problem is not unknown person, it's known person, because it's too many, not that much of settlers around us. It's like they call it Fityan Tilal or something like this. These people, it's a criminal. They're criminal. Even one time I was in my land and I told the soldier, are you here for security of me and the settlers, or only for the settlers? He said, nothing to do with you. I'm here because of the settlers. I told him, but you are in my land. How come you secure somebody came from nowhere and you can secure me to be in my land?
Said, I think that's a great finish, and we'll pass it on to Avner, who his work is breaking the silence, and himself his personal work as a soldier who served in the occupied territories. Perhaps, Avner, give us a soldier's perspective. What is the role of the military? What do the soldiers, what do they feel about settler violence? How do they respond? Do they participate or prevent? And if you could provide some personal examples and the connection between the settlers and the military, that would be greatly helpful.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lior, and thank you, everyone. I think it's your noon or afternoon in our evening. I think the most important thing to understand about settler violence is that in this time and age and the velocity of the violence, it's important to understand that there is not government-led decision for settler violence, but there's definitely a system of lack of law enforcement, which is important, I think, to understand when looking at this phenomenon, especially tying it into de facto annexation, because the reality of settler violence is not disconnected from the role of the settlers within the occupation, and I think that's a link that sometimes gets lost. As Lior mentioned, I served myself as a paratrooper, special ops, and served a lot in the heart of the West Bank. Actually, most of my service, because we were special ops, wasn't really with connection to settlers. But as young soldiers, we were sent to do regional guarding duties. So it's sort of a weekend here, a few days there, and we were sent to guard a settlement in the South Hebron Hills, a settlement that I know well, and many of the people probably on this call, or many of the people that have been to the J Street tours, have been with us to Susia in the South Hebron Hills, and I was actually sent to guard the settlement of Susia, which has, like many settlements, also adjacent to it, unauthorized outposts that are illegal both under Israeli law and obviously under international law. And when we got there as young soldiers, the person who welcomed us and also gave us orders was the regional guarding officer, who was a settler himself. Now, when you think about this for a second, it actually makes sense. The settler has been living there for a very long time. He knows the area. My officer probably is first time in the region. So it was very natural that a settler was giving orders to the soldiers. But this is exactly the reason that we see such a close connection between the soldiers and the settlers, because they're basically working hand to glove. So when you have this internalized situation where the settlers and the military are working so closely together, when you see phenomenons of settler violence, which happen all over the West Bank, and very often, I suggest follow all our Twitter feeds and specifically Lior, who's been documenting settler violence, through Yesh, you'll see this is something that happens every couple of days. This is connected to the reality of soldier, military, and settler connection. And just as I'm sort of my closing remarks before I'm done with my 5 minutes, I think I would suggest looking at this sort of as a triangle of control, where the state, the military, and the settler community are all working at the end of the day together. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't frictions between soldiers and settlers. And it doesn't mean that the phenomenon of settler violence is not something that is of concern to the military. But, and that this is a very big but, there is almost no real attempt to deal with this phenomenon as long as the settlers themselves are actually the law. And this goes very deep, not only with graffiti or even burning cars, but it runs as deep as the settler movement itself. And if you look at the process of legalizing outposts, I mean, that's a form of settler violence, of taking over land, of terrorizing the communities around them. And as that expands, as that grows, then the cases and the phenomena that Said and Lior and Sarit all know well so much about are only going to happen more. Thank you.
Thank you, Avner, and just on time. And I think that brings us exactly to Sarit, who's been, as said, documenting this and working on this for quite some time and is a known expert about this. Sarit, maybe give us an insight to on the surface of it, a human rights perspective, but maybe also a political perspective where Avner ended. What is the political goals of this? What is the human rights aspect of this? How do you see this?
Yeah, well, in this case, I think it's very important to remember that settler violence isn't just a reflection of some, kind of like individual criminality among people who are these crazy guys living on hilltops and like it's sometimes made out to look in the Israeli media. It's a very orchestrated and organized strategic tool that is aimed to remove Palestinians from vast land tracts throughout the West Bank in order for the Israeli settlements to then take them over. And this is done through many tools, primarily just intimidation and violence, but also in some cases through the destruction of crops, through making areas unprofitable, right? Because people cannot actually cultivate them. Recently, in recent years, since for the past 4 years or so, one of the biggest causes of settler violence has been these herder outposts that are popping up throughout the West Bank, where with the use of a very small amount of sheep or goat and a group of young settlers, you can take over literally thousands of dunams. You can intimidate Palestinian herders and harm them and remove them from these areas. And these have been extremely successful, unfortunately, with reducing the ability of Palestinians to even enjoy the herding and grazing land and be able to survive and exist with their herding economy. So this is just one example of many. And I think when we look at this in this way as a very strategic tool, not, every so often you will have a specifically violent or sadistic individual who becomes the de facto sheriff of an area. All of the Palestinians know him because he's attacking them violently and utilizing his strength, his weapons, the fact that he's armed, and the fact that he can, call immediately soldiers whenever there's any kind of conflict or disagreement. But this is not about individuals. It's about a state-sponsored, sanctioned tool. And this is why we refer to this phenomenon as state-backed settler violence. This is a crucial issue in understanding it and in combating it. I think a very good example is, only yesterday there was news that the OC Central Command, the commander of all military forces in the West Bank, Tamir Yadai, met with a group of youth in quite a well-known violent outpost called Maoz Esther in the eastern Ramallah area, as a kind of like a meeting to open up some sort of dialogue between these groups. So it's kind of akin to, I'm just trying to kind of think of maybe the head of the Capitol Police meeting up with the Proud Boys to try and open some kind of discussion about these issues. That's the level of cooperation you see. And I think it makes sense, right? When and like Avner described, this kind of like symbiotic relationship between the army and the settlement leadership that is kind of forcing this, or that is promoting this level of land takeovers. Clearly, this tactic or this tool of settler violence is very useful under these circumstances.
Thank you, Sarit, and we'll come back to you later on in the next session, perhaps about the political forces that are pushing this. So maybe this will continue. But first, and we're getting some great questions that I will try to incorporate maybe in the last one and throughout this session. But maybe to take this to Said. Said, you were the mayor of Turmus. You're now in the municipality. You're a landowner and a farmer, if I'm not mistaken. Give us a little bit of that complexity. What is the role of Palestinian politics from the bottom to the top? How do the Palestinians deal with this phenomenon? What do they have in play, if at all? So give us from a political perspective, from the Palestinian politics about settler violence.
As a Palestinian government, they don't have no power to come close to even to our city or to our town, because we are in B. That means we don't have no power at all from the Palestinian government. If we're gonna call them, they're gonna call the DCO to make an arrangement to come even to see our land, which is, it doesn't happen until everything is done. This is the problem. The problem of the Palestinian government, it doesn't own a piece of land. They own one piece here, one piece there, one piece there, because they cut, all the West Bank has been cut three ways, A, B, C. A is the Palestinian government. B, a Palestinian authority, but not the power. C, it's Israeli control. We are like my land, it's in C. That means I supposed to be protected from the Israeli government and the soldiers when I go there. But as with these settlements, we had about like 5 settlements around Turmus Ayya. It's in C, and let's say 1 month ago, I was in the valley, and we had some problem with the settlements, with the settlers. I asked the captain of the soldiers was there. I asked him, we gonna do some defense on my land. He said, you can't even move 1 stone from this land because it's under our control. I told him how I could protect my land from the settlers. He said, you don't have no protection at all for now. Okay, you have to go to the government to make a claim and all that stuff. And also, the worst part is when you go to your land, when we make a arrangement with the government of Israel to go there, they send soldiers with us to be protected in my land, to be protected. And this time, if a settlers come out and he said, he make some noise or some action, the soldiers, they will let us leave our land even in this part of time. which is we can't even reach our land only 4 days a year. If one settlers get mad or something, we want to do something, they throw us out of our land. That's one part. Second part, this what did she said from Yazdin, a group like one guy, he has like 5 or 6 sheep. He take over the mountains. Okay, if they come to our land with our trees, they damage our trees because of he has a sheep. Okay, when we go there, which we don't go there only twice a year, like I said, twice a year, like I said before, that means when I seen my trees has been cut or has been eaten, we call the DCO, we call the irtibat, what they call it, I don't know, irtibat. He comes up, oh, okay, we make a claim, make the claim and put it under the table because it's under unknown. It's our problem in here with the Palestinian government because they can't reach the land. With the settlers, they have the army and they have their own army, which is they had been their own weapons. You don't, you will be afraid on yourself and your family even to come too close to the area, which is 1 kilo or 3 kilos away from that area, because they will come down as crazy people. They put fire on the cars and they damage their cars. In the valley, in our valley, which is in B, what they call it, B, right? In B area, we had like in this year, we had like 6 or 7 accidents, damaged cars, attacking some people, and attacking the land, which is they cut some olive trees in this part of year. We hope, let me tell you something, we hope for Israeli government to understand that means we are human, we're not an animal, live somewhere in the forest. We are human and we live in this land, not from today, not from yesterday. We live in generation and generation. And this land, we get it as a heritage from our grandfather. This is
thank you. I want to wrap this a bit and to move it to Sarit to understand what you're saying. So Sarit is telling us we're Palestinians, we're humans, we don't have a lot of political power. So even to go to our lands, we have to get the approval of the Israeli military. So we own lands, but to some of our lands, we can only reach a couple of times a year. Avner is telling us soldiers are getting orders from settlers, are cooperating, don't know how to deal with this phenomena, etc. Lead us to what the political forces are. How is this happening? What's working? Which forces are in play that are enabling this in order for them to succeed in their political ambitions?
Well, I mean, I'll answer that, and I'll also try and refer to a couple of the questions that were placed on the Q&A, which are very interesting, regarding the Israeli perspective and support, and what Israelis think about settler violence, and also how much support there is among settlers for settler violence. So certainly not all settlers, right? There are over 600,000 Israelis living over the Green Line in areas outside of Israel's sovereign territory. Certainly no one is claiming that they're all violent, although we would certainly argue that the occupation regime that has established the settlement is in its, is in an essential way a violent regime, and it requires violence to maintain it. But in these frontier areas that Israel has de facto annexed and it covets, unfortunately for Israel, I'm being a bit sarcastic here, those are privately owned Palestinian lands, like for example, the land of Turmus Ayya, which is very wonderful and actually very vast. There are settlers and settlements who would like to and wish to expand onto this land. There are many different legal tricks that Israel utilized in order to kind of like take over Palestinian land, but that's not enough for some. And therefore, this whole phenomenon has evolved of attacking Palestinians who approach the settlements. That has been a feature of many years from now, and settlers coming out and cutting down or vandalizing olive trees is a feature of, I've been at B'Tselem for over 16 years, and this is something that we've been documenting from the beginning. This actually connects me to the second issue, which is that I think that a lot of Israelis are extremely shocked by these actions, especially when we bring video, and all of our organizations manage to provide video evidence of these incidents. A lot of Israelis are shocked. I don't think all Israelis support this, but Israelis generally do not oppose the political reality that has been established on the ground throughout the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, which privileges Jewish presence, Jewish supremacy. B'Tselem referred to this reality throughout, not just in the West Bank, but throughout our region as an apartheid regime, a regime of Jewish supremacy that aims through various practices and policies to take over Palestinian land for Israeli Jewish use. And I think this is very important when we look at this big picture, because when Israelis are shocked, for example, during the olive harvest, when Palestinians are trying to get to their olive trees and pick them, and all they see are burnt down or sometimes chopped down, vandalized trees. That is quite shocking for a lot of Israelis. But what are we doing? What are we Israelis doing in order to end this situation? In order to create a situation where all Palestinians will be able to access their land, and where this kind of violence will not be constantly encouraged through the ability of settlers to achieve their political goals, utilizing this violence. And maybe I should also add, because you didn't mark an end to my time frame, that when you look at Israeli political representatives right now, when you look at the kind of support that extremist settler supporting oriented members of Knesset receive and have, this is, makes it very clear.
Okay, and maybe we should note that Judith Karp, who was in the Ministry of Justice, wrote a report on settler violence in 1983 for the Ministry of Justice, referring to settler violence during the 70s and the lack of law enforcement. So this is definitely not a new phenomena that is happening. It does have various forms throughout has evolved in many ways. But maybe, Sarit, you talked about the Israeli public opinion, but Avner and Breaking the Silence, they lead hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis to see Hebron. They discuss settler violence. They work a lot in the Israeli public. And it is one of the ugliest, right? It's one of the ugliest phenomena of the occupations. It's clear, it's easy to distance ourselves from this phenomena. And yet, as you suggested, it's happening, it's achieving its goals. Avner, how do you see it in the Israeli public? What's happening there?
I think I agree with Sarit. I mean, there is a disgust from the actions, and I would even add to it that I think in the moments where the settler violence is turned towards soldiers, which is also a phenomenon that has been going on for many years, and is well documented by many organizations and footage, and many of our testifiers have testified about this as well. Those are the moments where the public wakes up a bit. And there have been some pretty violent attacks on soldiers, officers, and commanders. And those are sort of like a aha moment sometimes where, right, maybe this is a moment where you'll find more of a public outcry. But, and I think this is important to notice, this will be in the headlines for maybe a few hours, maybe a day, if this will be a big issue. But I think the disconnect between the settler violence and the system that allows the settler violence allows this to be written off as an outliner. And I think this is part of the ability of the public to move on and let the news cycle run. I think in the end of the day, and this has to do generally with every element of the occupation, but maybe even more so with settler violence, the feeling is within the Israeli public, especially with the pandemic, but I think this has been true generally, so many things are going on, and if it's not broken, why fix it? And I think the importance of highlighting the issue of settler violence is to keep showing how broken the system is. But at this point, and we see this with the upcoming election, the fact that we are controlling millions of people by force, maintaining a military dictatorship. I think at this point, the majority of the Israeli political leadership is seeing this as an indefinite feature, not a bug, but a main feature even. We will continue to control Palestinians this way or the other. This is a non-issue in this upcoming election. And I think that the issue of settler violence does have the ability, I think, because of the clear ugliness of it, to break that a bit and maybe to wake more people up, and that's part of the reason this conversation is so important. But I think the work around it is so crucial in order to shake the public into reaction.
Thanks, Avner. And Sarit, going back to you. So Said and Avner, this is our last round of the session. I'm trying to incorporate some of the things I'm getting from the Q&A. And somebody's asking about the U.S. administration. And I know, Sarit, you've been working a lot on international advocacy for B'Tselem. We just had so Avner talked about the upcoming elections in Israel. We just had elections in the US. What will happen now? Is there going to be any change? What's your expectations and how do you see this? And perhaps what's needed? What should be our expectations from the new Biden administration?
Well, I think first of all, what happens now is not a done deal. It depends on us, and it depends. And certainly, if we're in this forum with activists and people affiliated with J Street, then certainly the essential thing is for you to make it clear to the administration through through Congress and through your other connections that this is an issue that you view as essential to fulfilling the obligations. Not necessarily in terms of foreign policy, but also in terms of the human rights obligations of this administration. I would also maybe want to add something about the connection between settler violence and the flip side, right? The other side of the coin, which is this devastation of Palestinian communities living in Area C. Very often it's herder communities, agricultural communities, but not only. And I would argue very strongly that these two phenomena are very much part of one broad picture of land takeover. It's not just me arguing it. I think all of us have reached this conclusion. All of us in our broad community, and therefore this kind of like puts even more of an imperative on the U.S. administration to acknowledge that settler violence is part of a broad Israeli kind of process of taking over Palestinian land. Certainly, I think there have been, various statements from the previous administration denouncing specific acts of settler violence, but I think it's very important not to simply place it in this kind of like special category and just say, well, these are extremists on both sides, we will denounce them. Of course, although there should be denouncements, but the systemic and the strategic and the political nature of this phenomenon has to be acknowledged by any administration that seeks to fulfill its own foreign policy objectives, right? And certainly J Street's objectives of a two-state outcome, because it's all clearly related to the Israeli takeover of Palestinian land and the perpetuation of, like Avner was discussing, of our control over Palestinians.
Okay, terrific. And maybe from here, Said, so Sarit talked about the change in administration a little bit, but also that settler violence is not just a unique phenomenon. It's part of many forms of violence under the occupation. And for you as a Palestinian who is living under occupation, but also as an American citizen, do you feel that your voice is being heard in the Biden administration? If there's one thing that or a couple of things that you would like to tell the American administration, the American citizens, J Street supporters who advocate the American administration, what would you want them to understand of Palestinians living under occupation?
Okay. First of all, as a Palestinian, we love to be in peace. We love to be in peace, and we try to be in peace. Like I was in America, I had a lot of friends. I used to be in New York. I had a lot of friends, Jewish friends, and we used to invite each other. And we are close to each other. The problem is, let me tell you something. Okay, let's go to America. Let's stay with the American government. We hope for the American government to understand we own our land. We own lands, and we don't want this land to be certificated from the Israeli government or from the settlements or settlers. That's one thing. Second thing, as American, I would like to hear about our counselor, to hear about our problem with where we are. We are under occupation. It's very easy. The peace movement and all that stuff, it does happen for two states. It's very easy. 67 and 67, and thank you very much. But also, and this time, and this period of time, with the settlers and with the settlements has been put in our land, it's very tough to make a peace. If it doesn't have no power from outside to push and Israeli government to let them, okay, this is a Palestinian land, let this Palestinian land, let these people live in their land, let them free in their land. Where we gonna end with? But we hope for the American to hear our voice, to hear our problem, and to hear about the human rights of ourselves. That's what is it.
Thank you, Said. And maybe Avner, tell us what you would push J Street supporters to do. How can J Street supporters help Israelis or people who are opposing settler violence and the occupation? What can they do?
I mean, first of all, I think they should hear Said more. Thank you so much for that, Said. And I think that so simple. Recognize Palestinians' humanity. I mean, what could be more simple than that? And I think in the next 4 years, the Biden administration, I think there's so much to do. And I think the first basic steps have to be, as Said mentioned, recognizing Palestinians' humanity, and with that, listening to Palestinians. And we as Israeli organizations, anti-occupation organizations, can help echo that and help expand that message. But I think first and foremost, and I know J Street has been doing this, thinking about this, and actively inviting Palestinian speakers. There needs to be more Palestinian speakers on the Hill, meeting with elected officials, understanding what this day-to-day reality feels like for millions of people. Secondly, I would say, seize this opportunity where the American administration, Biden, Blinken, Kerry, speak with the language of human rights, right? We missed this. This language with the Trump administration was not part of the lingo. It's back in use, but we have to make sure it's not empty. And we have to make sure that when discussed, when issues of human rights are discussed, then we cannot be, as the phrase goes, progressive except Palestine. And there needs to be an ability to put this issue on the table for the future of Israelis and Palestinians. And I'll just add one other point, and this is use the horrible 4-year legacy of the Trump administration and his political allies, our political opponents, from the settler community, Netanyahu, the evangelical community, and so on and so forth. And we have to use the same chutzpah that they have used, and think proactively and make sure that even if there is not a peace deal around the corner tomorrow, that we allow these issues to stay on the table. And there are many supportive voices in Washington that I know J Street are working with. And we are here to help with knowledge and information, in order to make sure your voices are heard loud and clear.
Wonderful. Thank you. On that note, I'm running through, so we finished our three sort of rapid sessions, and I'm running through the Q&A, and I'm seeing questions about characteristic of violent settlers. Who are they? Gender, age, where do they come from? Amount, and what is causing these incidents? Questions about policy. How did the Trump administration contribute or not contribute to settler violence? This is one to Said. Are settlers and soldiers to you, are they the same? Are they, when you see a soldier, when you see a settler, do you perceive them as the same? Some political questions about annexation and two states. Is it even relevant to speak about this? And also the media, settler violence in the media. How is it being portrayed? And why is it not being portrayed in the US media? I don't know if any of you have expertise on this, maybe if you want to say something about that, maybe also about Israeli or Palestinian media. So whoever wants to pick up, maybe we'll start with Sarit, with characteristics and causes for increase, and whatever else you want to pick up.
I'll try and kind of maybe in my 5 minutes or whatever, try and kind of like address several of these issues. Maybe just first to start by saying that it is true that a lot of it isn't appearing in the media, but a lot is. I don't think that there is a total lack of information around, and there are an amazing group of organizations, both Israeli and Palestinian human rights groups like Yesh and B'Tselem, my organization, Palestinian groups, and the UN, right, UN OCHA, that all provide information. I'll link some in the chat feature so you can all look at them. And I don't want to get into too many like technical details, but all of this information is documented and available. And the fact that almost everyone has a mobile phone camera now in the West Bank makes it quite common to see this footage. The issue isn't always whether the media broadcasts this. Obviously in the US, you guys have been kind of doing quite a lot over the past 4 years in distracted somewhat, but I think the question is, how is it framed? Is it just framed as some kind of like, a few rotten apples or an unpleasant incident, or viewed as, how we describe this, how we look at it as a kind of strategic tool and systemic issue? And this is something that of course, I think all the media are still very far behind on. In terms of the characteristics, I mean, certainly there is the settlers and youth and individuals who are involved in this are more extreme politically and religiously. This is something that we have to be aware of, although there are exceptions as well. There are secular herder outposts that are really using a lot of violence against their neighbors. But in any case, again, I think there's quite a lot of resources that are available on this. There's also a lot of resources written on the history of the settler movement generally. So it's really worthwhile, and I would totally recommend that people read or watch documentary films about these issues. And there's quite a lot of kind of good lists around. I'll also try and paste some here if you want to kind of educate yourselves. And just in terms of what causes fluctuations in settler violence, I mean, I wouldn't want to give like an exact formula, but I think clearly when the prevailing wind is supportive of the use of force to achieve these political goals, then certainly settlers hear it very well and the youth hear it very well. And if there is a clearer kind of message that comes that this is unacceptable, this obviously needs to be conveyed through law enforcement, and we know it simply has not been, aside from a few very, very specific and prominent cases where the authorities looked into it. Certainly settlers and the violent element who are working on this issue will hear very well what this means.
Okay, Said, maybe you want to refer to settlers and soldiers. Do you perceive them as the same?
Are you to me? I have to. Hello. It's the
Yes,
question.
we hear you. So any of the questions, there's one directly to you about the question of how if you see a difference between settlers and soldiers in the way you
Okay.
perceive them, but also there are other questions that Sarit didn't refer to, if you want to tackle them, annexation and the two-state solution, settler violence and the media, previous policies by Trump, maybe if you want to look at future policies, we did discuss that a bit of Biden.
First of all, I thank all the organization work with us. Really, truthfully, that's from my heart. That question, that thanks. Second of all, I know, and I think all the organization working in the West Bank, if you wanna write the violence of the settlers and the soldiers, you could write 500 pages or maybe 1,000 pages, and you won't finish. You know that. The main thing is the soldiers and the settler. When you one time, which is fact, I'm telling you what's going on in the field. One time was problem with the settlers. We called the soldiers. The soldiers was there. He told me in his mouth, listen, this guy is not feeling good. The settlers not feeling good today, and you have to leave your field. I told him, are you the law? He said, yes, but I can't do nothing. Why you want to throw me out of my land and you want to let the settlers do his things? I counted soldiers and settlers in the same field because they support them all the way. They can't even, when they see them, one time we was in the field, and one of the settlers came to my wife, and one guy came to me, and one guy with the machine gun for sure. And one guy, he hit my wife. When he hit my wife, I didn't see nobody in front of my face that time. Okay, it does happen some action, and after them the soldiers came with the policemen, with the policemen and all that people. Okay, in the same minutes, my wife, she point that settler was in between the soldier. She told me, that's the guy, he came and hit me. And I went to the policeman. I told him, this is the guy, he came to our field and he hit us in our field. He said, well, I swear to God, it does happen in front of my eye. He put him in his car and he took him to the settlements. Tell me, what's the difference between the soldiers and the settlers? When you see this fact in the field, in our land, not in their land, from where they came, we don't know. His name, one guy, his name is Boaz. He came and he put one barracks in there and end up with the settlements, a whole settlements, and damaging all the trees. I had been with this problem. I had been from 1991 until now. I'm losing. 1991, I owned all my land. It was planted and all that stuff. Every single year, I lose part of my land. Every single year. It's right now. When I go there, I feel like my heart is gonna blow up because when I see my land, where's the settlers in it, and when I can't even go to my will, which is that will that has been from my father and father and father, I can't even reach that part of my land. How you feel? Somebody came from nowhere, took your home and throw you out. Look how bad is it? And with the soldiers in front of the eye of the soldier, this is our problem.
Some very powerful stuff, and we started off, or I think the mixture or the confusion of, is this a political phenomena or is it a human rights one? And we see how they're both, and we can't forget either. So it's a political tool. They're getting lands, they're taking it by force, but they're also, at the end of the day, it's a human rights one. It's affecting you, and it's affecting your wife and your neighbors and everybody. It's 3 minutes till the end. I do want to give the opportunity if Sarit or Avner, you want to say some final remarks on your end. If not, I'll pass it out to Zach. Sarit, Avner, you want to
No,
have a conclusion?
I'd just like to thank you for and to all the attendees for the interest in this issue, and really would like to encourage you to engage with your representatives on this. It's not, you know, as I said, the policy of this future administration, I don't think is a done deal. There's a lot of sway for people like you. So thank you and good luck.
Well said, Sarit. Thank you.
I just want to echo that, and just, you know, I think this came up from a lot of the points. The fact that not each and every settler is involved in settler violence does not mean that this phenomenon is not systematic, right? And I think that's important to understand. You know, just imagine a settlement spot, and the ripple effect of what happens around it, and that violence is exactly what Said mentioned, with the backing, sometimes proactive actions of the soldiers. I mean, this is exactly the process of de facto annexation that is taking place. So thank you so much for listening today.
Great. So thank you, Sarit, Avner, and Said, for this wonderful discussion. I've learned a lot, and I'm dealing with this for quite some time. I would take Sarit's suggestion to look at some of the wonderful websites you put in the chat. You can see some more info or in the Q&A. Where is it? In the chat box. So you can see some more and learn more about this phenomena, which unfortunately we can expect to continue, and so we have a lot of work to do as well. So us organizations and J Street and its supporters. So thank you very much again, and over to you, Zach.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to our panelists. Thank you Lior from Yesh, Sarit from B'Tselem, Avner from Breaking the Silence, and Said, the former mayor of Turmus, Ayya. This was recorded. You can find the recording on our website or on our Facebook page, as well as past recordings from previous conversations. And if you learned a lot today, you will definitely appreciate joining us at our virtual national conference. It's April 18th and 19th in a couple months. You can see the link in the chat, or you can go to jstreet.org/conference. I'm sure you'll see some familiar faces. I want to say personally, you know, thank you so much for all the work all of you do. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experiences with us. And thank you to everyone who watched today and asked questions. See you next time.